Okay, now despite being late to the party like usual, today we're going to be talking about the Liquid Platinum from Monoprice and Monolith. Now this isn't Alex Cavalli amp, as I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. This is, as of right now, the only tube amplifier that I've come across that I actually recommend for planar magnetic headphones. Actually, even really demanding planar magnetic headphones. This thing runs pretty smoothly. But this is sort of weird because most other tube amps I do not recommend. So why do I recommend that for this specific amplifier? This really comes down to the power characteristics of this amplifier and the sound quality. Now this is going to work really well with higher impedance dynamic headphones. Think like your HC600s, your Bayer Dynamics, and that comes down to mainly the voltage capability that's in here. And basically the lower in impedance you go, the less and less power it has. Now that is the opposite with the vast majority of modern solid state amplifiers, and that is the opposite of this. This actually outputs the most amount of power with the least amount of impedance. This actually outputs 6.6 watts into 32 ohms and about 4.4 watts into 64 ohms. So this amplifier is actually really well suited to power modern planar magnetic headphones. And then you get the benefits of the tubes, and we'll talk about why I air quoted that in a second. Physical build is pretty decent. This is very similar, but obviously a little bit larger and a little bit heavier than it. But this is a very similar build to the Liquid Spark, which is a little $100 solid state amplifier. You have your basic outputs on the front, like single-ended XLR output, and then of course your volume knob. And on the back, it's actually pretty simple. You just have RCA in and pre-out, and then your XLR inputs, and of course your power input. Now the power brick is not built into this unit. That is something that's falling a little bit behind in kind of today's modern standards for this price range. A lot of the modern amplifiers have their power supplies built in. This one does not. Now this is about the same size as your typical kind of like THX size amplifiers. A lot of the toppings are about this size, but it's kind of got this slightly unique design styling with kind of the tapered off edges. And of course you have the ventilation on the top on either side, and then a big vent on the bottom. And then of course you have your two tubes out here. Now the total harmonic distortion for this is about 0.002%, which is very low for a tube amplifier. Actually, that's really good. The crosstalk is also about -88 dB. So this thing actually measures actually fantastically as far as measurements go for a tube amplifier. Now that is one of the few things about the Liquid Platinum that really it makes me question what I should compare this to, and kind of hear me out here. So the main reason why I'm questioning what I should compare this to is because the listening impressions do not provide you, at least not me, with a tube-like presentation from an amplifier. This to me sounds straight up solid state. Maybe a little bit warmer, but honestly, you can get the same warmth just by going from two different brands of solid state amplifier. Like you went from, a shit solid state to a topping solid state. One might be slightly warmer than the other. And that's about the difference that I'm hearing going from a Gustard X16 to this thing. This is perhaps a little bit warmer, maybe a little bit smoother top end, maybe a little bit warmer in the bass response, a little bit thumpier. Now the differences here are so minor that this may be placebo, a slight volume difference, maybe even a slight voltage difference between the two different amplifiers, and just playing with that specific headphone a little bit odd. Now, this is not necessarily a terrible thing depending on how you're looking at it. And of course, a totally noteworthy aspect to this is that because this comes with tubes, you can swap this out for less neutral tubes to get something a little bit warmer. Okay, so there are some benefits to this amplifier as it stands right now. If you're just going for a solid state sound, I think it's worth mentioning that you can get it for cheaper. And the weird thing is that this does provide a solid state sound, so why would I recommend it if it sounds like a solid state, but you can get solid states cheaper? And that's simply because of the potential tube flexibility. Now you may have to spend an extra $100 to $200 to get better tubes or different tubes that sound a little bit more tubular if you want, but you can always go back to these stock tubes and get a really good representation of an amplifier. Now what makes this worth it for me is that this amplifier in its stock formation can handle incredibly demanding planars really easily. For example, these Susvaras, which are very difficult to drive for any amplifier, this thing actually handles pretty well. And I'm usually about 60 to 70% turned up. I almost never go higher than about 85, even on quiet songs on this headphone. That performance from a tube amplifier is nuts. this thing wouldn't even create enough volume on a loud song to be pleasing on that dark voice, and the bass would be all kind of muddy and sloppy. Not with this. Now, if you do plan to tube roll this thing in the future, I would genuinely recommend this, mostly because the foundation that you plug the tubes into is just so solid. Like, it's just got such a large amount of power. Now, it's not totally clean if you're plugging in really efficient headphones or IEMs. You're going to hear a little bit of feedback, a little bit of noise, but with anything that's kind of more kind of demanding as a headphone, this thing is going to handle excellently, even up to what is probably the most demanding headphone on the market right now. Okay, now if you don't want to tube roll this thing, if you just want to get an amplifier that's really, really good for the money, I could make a different suggestion at a little bit cheaper cost, and that would be the Topping A90. You know, the Topping maybe sounds a little bit more neutral, but one, it's $500, so coming in a couple $100 cheaper than this amp is. Two, it's got probably the best measurements for that price of any amplifier, about $500 and under. And three, it puts out approximately the same amount of power, but it can also easily handle things like IEMs with a very, very clean output there. So if you just want a super clean sound like this offers out of the box, I think you should probably just straight go with a solid state. And that should probably be where you're looking. If you plan on tube rolling this down the road and you want a lot of power and to play it with Planars, this is probably going to be my go-to recommendation, though it's not cheap. Okay, I think that's going to wrap it up. Thank you very much for watching. Until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off. Peace.